Chapter 41. There was a sense of déjà vu about arriving back at Seacliff Fife. Very little seemed to have changed in his absence. Once again, the shadows were lengthening in the late afternoon. The trees that had lost their leaves through the winter months were busy regaining them now. There was a feeling of peace and safety about the gentle woods and fields that was in distinct contrast to the past few months. The ferry was drawn up on the island side this time, and, after he rang the gong, Will waited patiently as the ferryman cast off the mooring ropes and heaved the flat-bottomed boat back across the river. "No charge for you, Ranger," the man said automatically, as Will urged Tug forward and the little horse's hooves clattered on the ferry deck. Will allowed himself a wry smile. Even that hadn't changed. He took out a royal and handed it down to the man. "One person, one animal. I make that a royal." The ferryman showed mild interest, glancing around. "No dog this time?" he asked. "That's right," Will said, and his tone told the man he didn't wish to discuss the matter. The ferryman shrugged. He was happy not to get into a conversation with a ranger, particularly this one, who had shown himself to be rather unpredictable. Wildly exaggerated tales of the banquet at Castle Seacliff, where the Scandians had been guests of honour, had circulated during Will's absence. Will dismounted and leaned on the rope rail at the bow of the ferry as the cumbersome boat began to slide across the narrow waterway to the island. The ferryman's comment had highlighted his sense of aloneness. After weeks spent in the company of Horace, Alice, Gundar, and Mallkallam, he felt the solitude all the more keenly. Even the comfort of the dog's company was denied him now. A shaggy head butted him, and he looked round into Tug's eyes. "I'm still here." He smiled again, then rubbed the rough muzzle and scratched behind the horse's ears. "You're right, boy," he said. "I've still got you, and thank God for it." Tug shook his mane in that violent, vibrating way that horses have. It seemed an affirmation of Will's statement. Will glanced around and saw that the ferryman was watching him suspiciously. He had spoken in a low tone, so there was no way the man could have heard what he said, and for that he was grateful. It wouldn't do to have it known that a grim-faced, taciturn ranger could actually be moping from loneliness. But the fact that he was talking to the horse confirmed the ferryman's superstitious belief that rangers were black magicians. He turned away and made the warding sign against sorcery. The sooner this one was off the ferry, the better. The blunt prow grated into the beach. The ferryman tossed a hawser around the pole sunk deep in the sand, hauled it tight, and secured it with a quick series of half-hitches. Then he unfastened the bow rail, allowing Will to ride off onto dry land. "Thank you," Will said. The man didn't reply. He watched as the cloaked and hooded figure disappeared into the first of the trees, made the warding sign again, and then settled down to await his next customer. The Stag's Head banner still floated above the castle as Will rode out of the trees at the top of the winding path. The village seemed unchanged, and he experienced the same looks as he rode through. A mixture of wariness and interest. Some of the villagers wondered where the young ranger had been, what he had been doing. Others were more than content not to know anything at all about his movements. He rode past the inn. This time there was no sign of the young woman, Delia, he remembered, smiling at him from an upper-floor window. He felt vaguely disappointed. He could have done with the sight of a friendly face. As he rode up to his little cabin in the trees, there was no welcoming curl of smoke from the chimney. Not surprising, he thought. Edwina, the woman engaged as caretaker, would have had no warning of his imminent return. He unsaddled Tug, rubbed him down, and fed and watered him. Then he carried his saddlebags inside. At least the cabin was clean and tidy. Edwina had obviously dusted while he had been gone. There was no musty, confined smell either, telling him she must have aired the place regularly. He dropped his saddlebags across his bed and returned to the larger room, his footsteps sounding loud in the empty cabin. He glanced down, saw the dog's water and food bowls arranged neatly beside the fireplace. He shrugged sadly, picked them up, and took them outside, setting them down on the small veranda against the wall of the cabin. He didn't want to sit around staring at them through the night. "Oh, for God's sake, snap out of it," he told himself. "So you're on your own. That's the way you chose to be. You chose it when you chose to be a ranger. You chose it again when you wouldn't take the risk of telling Alice how you feel about her. So stop moping and get on with life. Do something useful. Light a fire and make dinner." Moving more briskly, he went back inside and began setting kindling in the pot-bellied stove that stood in the center of the living room. As the tiny yellow flames flicked around the wood and grew brighter and fiercer, he felt a strengthening of his resolve. He'd warm the cabin up, light a few lamps, and drive the gathering darkness back a little. Then, he decided, he wouldn't make his own meal. Later, he'd wander over to the inn and have dinner and a glass or two of wine. And he might just reacquaint himself with that very pretty and very friendly innkeeper's daughter. She was a cheerful companion, he remembered. In his current mood, the fact that she seemed to admire him and look up to him only added to her attraction. Yes, he thought, that's what he needed, a good dinner, wine, and a pleasant time with an attractive girl. He'd report to the castle tomorrow, but tonight it was time for him to cheer himself up. He turned as he heard a footstep behind him. For a moment, since Delia was on his mind, he thought that the figure framed in the doorway was her. Then his eyes adjusted, and he recognized her mother, Edwina. "Sir, you're back! I'm sorry, I had no idea you were—" He waved her apology aside. "Not your fault, Edwina," he told her. "I should have sent word ahead that I was on my way. But I see you've taken care of things while I've been gone." "Oh, yes, sir. I made sure I opened the place up every few days to let the air in. Place gets musty and mouldy else." She was looking around curiously, and he saw her gaze light on the 2 bowls that he'd placed outside the front door. He forestalled the next question. "I left the dog with a friend," he said, and she nodded. Not sure whether he thought that was a good or bad thing. "I'm sure you did, sir. Well, I'll be happy to bring your dinner over directly. Are you hungry, sir?" Will smiled. "I'm starved, and looking forward to your cooking. But I think I'll eat at the inn. Save a place for me, would you? I'll be over in an hour or so." "Indeed, sir. We'll be honoured to have you. And welcome home." She gave a hint of a curtsy and turned away. Will's spirits rose a little. Amazing what the sight of a friendly face and a few words of welcome could do, he thought. "Edwina," he called, and she paused at the edge of the porch, turning back to him. "Yes, sir." "Your daughter, Delia. I trust she's well." He made sure his voice sounded casual. Her face lit up in a smile of motherly pride. "Oh, indeed she is, sir. You've heard, have you?" "Heard? Heard what?" "Why, the happy news, sir. She was married not 2 weeks ago. To Stephen, the ferryman's boy. Will nodded, a smile frozen on his face. At least, he hoped it looked like a smile. Excellent, he said. It was an easy word to say with his teeth clenched. I'm delighted for her. Some things had changed in Seacliff, he was glad to see. Over the next few weeks, as he settled back into the daily routine of the quiet little fief, he saw a new sense of application and professionalism in the battle school. Discipline had been tightened. The drills for apprentices were being properly conducted, and all round there was a greater sense of sharpness. Baron Argyll and his battle-master, Norris, had learned their lesson when they had nearly lost the fief to Gundar's marauding Scandians, he thought. Of course, when he first reported in on his return, Argyll and Norris had both quizzed him eagerly over the reason for his sudden departure some months earlier. But he told them nothing, politely averting their questions. Just a little trouble up north, was all he would say. There was no need for them to know the details about the actions of the Ranger Corps. They accepted his reticence as the natural secrecy people associated with rangers. He did offer to invite Horace to spend some time at Seacliff to give tuition on sword drill. The Oakleaf Knight was recognised as one of the kingdom's best swordsmen, and Will knew he regularly visited Redmont to conduct classes. Norris seized on the idea eagerly. I'll write to him, Will promised. In fact, the prospect of having his best friend visit from time to time was a decidedly pleasant one. Before he had a chance to write the letter, however, he received several interesting items of mail himself. Prominent among several envelopes was a large parcel, carefully wrapped in oilcloth and padded with wool clippings to protect it on its long journey. He looked curiously at the place of origin and was interested to see it came from Castle Macindaw, Norgate Fife. He unwrapped it eagerly. Inside a case of shaped leather lay a beautifully formed, gleaming mandola. There was a brief note included. I felt I owed you this. Perhaps a better instrument will improve your technique. My thanks once more, Orman. He inspected the beautiful instrument, his hands running over it reverently. On the headstock was a single word in elegant script. Gilet. Gilet, he thought, the master luthier renowned for creating some of the finest instruments in the kingdom. Quickly, he tuned it and played a few notes, marvelling at the richness of its tone and the silky smoothness of its touch. But, much as he admired the instrument, he felt little desire for music in his life these days. Somewhat sadly, he set the mandola to one side. There was a letter from Crowley, a general dispatch alerting corps members to a self-proclaimed prophet and his followers who were working their way through the kingdom, and bilking people of their savings. In addition, there was a note from Gundar. The Skirl had paid a professional scribe to write it for him. The new ship was nearly ready, he said. They had decided to call it Wolfwill. He smiled to himself. Doubtless one of the Scandians would carve a suitably horrific figurehead for the ship. He hoped Gundar would honour the joking promise he'd made at their parting and come visit one day. He began to tidy away the oilcloth and torn envelopes, and found another letter that had been concealed when he tossed the mandola's wrapping aside. He ripped it open without looking to see the sender's name. His heart lurched as he read the first few words. It was from Alice. Dearest Will, I trust this letter finds you well and happy. Lady Pauline is keeping me busy, but she gave me some time off to entertain Horace last week. He was visiting for one of his swordsmanship classes. He said to give you his best wishes. While he was here, I told him about a strange dream I keep having. We were back in the tower, and I have Keren's sword in my hand, and he's telling me to hurt you, and I can't refuse him. But then you say the most amazing and wonderful thing, and it completely breaks his hold over me. Horace says it might not be a dream. He believes it's a memory. I wish with all my heart that he's right, and that you did say what I think you said. He also told me that people like you and me spend too much time thinking things over, and not enough time just coming out and saying them. I think he's right. Write to me, please, and tell me what you did say. In the meantime, I'll take Horace's advice and just say it myself. I love you, Alice. He dropped the letter on the table, staring at it. He could write to her. A letter would take a week to reach Alice, but Tug was outside, saddled and ready, and he could be in Redmont in less than 3 days. He dashed to the bedroom and began cramming spare clothes into his saddlebags. He'd leave a message at the inn, telling Baron Argyll he'd be gone for a few days. Or a week. His boots rang on the floorboards as he made his way to the door, stepped down from the veranda, and slung the saddlebags over Tug's back. The little horse looked up in surprise. There was an energy and a purpose about his master that he hadn't seen for some time. Will was about to mount, then he hesitated. He ran back inside and picked up the gilet in its case, slinging it over one shoulder. Suddenly he felt there was room for music in his life after all. Making his way outside again, he paused for a second as he locked the cabin door behind him. He was conscious of an unfamiliar sensation, something he hadn't felt for some time. Then he realized what it was and smiled quietly to himself. It was happiness. You've been listening to Book 6 of the Ranger's Apprentice series by John Flanagan, The Siege of Macindaw, read by Australian Audiobooks. If you've enjoyed my reading, please remember to like this video and subscribe. You can also find me on Instagram at Australian Audiobooks.
Dancing steps are full of grace.